Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Housing Elements Digital Organizing Training. I'm Madison Roberts, the Narrative Specialist at NPH, and this is our third in a series of trainings to support our members and partners in recruiting and engaging community members for this Housing Elements cycle. The first two sessions focused on effective housing elements messaging, and now I'll be shifting gears to organizing, specifically digital organizing for today, so we can put that strategic messaging to work. As you know, NPH is a membership-based organization that supports affordable housing developers, advocates, and other stakeholders across the Bay Area. We assist with and developing, passing critical policies to ensure the 3 Ps, and we provide trainings and capacity building for the affordable housing industry. Before we get started with today's training, you are welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear your name, affiliation, what brings you here, or what you'd like to learn more about during today's session. To otherwise fill you in on this project, this training is a part of NPH's Housing Elements program, our goal being to support your community engagement and messaging needs during this once-a-decade opportunity to uplift housing and racial justice in this planning process. As a regional convener, NPH led a collaborative process to interview and gather feedback from dozens of stakeholders, including working groups, coalitions, and organizers to assess their needs and identify opportunities to add value here. Many of you on this call helped inform that process, and we want to give a special thank you to BOP members and public advocates. This project would have been impossible without your insight. And along with your wisdom, we are leveraging the research and learnings from Shift the Bay, our coalition-driven narrative initiative to advance housing and racial justice in the Bay Area. Shift the Bay brings us those research-driven and field practice strategies, tactics, and messages to drive new narratives for our movement in today's training. And you can learn more about the initiative's work and resources at shiftthebay.org. And we'll make sure, I see Alina already put them in there, and we'll make sure those links make it to the chat box as well. Before I hand things over to our presenters at MNR who will be delivering today's training, I want to note that we are always listening for additional ways to support the coalition's needs for successful housing elements advocacy. So please don't be shy with your questions, ideas, and comments. We are all ears. And active participation is more than encouraged. So feel free to use the chat box for reactions, comments, ideas. And just as a reminder, please make sure you're chatting all panelists and attendees, not just the panelists. But we will ask if you have specific questions that you want addressed by our presenters, please do put those directly in the Q&A box so we can keep track of them. With that, I want to introduce today's presenters. We are stoked to welcome Michael Ramirez, Account Supervisor at MNR, and Will Valverde, the Creative Director at MNR. I will pass things off to you two to get started. Thanks so much for leading today, y'all.
Thank you, Madison. Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Michael Ramirez, Account Supervisor at MNR. I'm actually a community organizer by trade. I've been organizing for over a decade based out of Denver, Colorado. I've organized around elections and advocacy and have more recently come to digital within the past few years, and definitely see a lot of similarities. So I love seeing all the different organizers on here as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Will.
Hi, everybody. I'm Will Valverde. I'm a Senior Creative Director at MNR. I think I've seen most of you on one of these trainings here or there before. My focus in working with NPH has really been around messaging over the last couple of years, and for the last few months around housing element messaging in particular. So we did a previous training on that that Madison mentioned, and I'm going to be weighing in a little bit on the sort of the creative messaging aspects of what we've got going on here, but I'm mostly here to listen to Michael's smart words about digital organizing.
Right on. Thank you, Will. So first off, want to share the agenda for today. So we're going to go through the what and why of digital organizing and how it connects to housing elements. We're then going to move on to telling effective stories to build power, meeting our supporters where they are, and the ladder of engagement. We're going to touch on some digital tools, and then we're going to have some time for questions at the end. But also feel free if you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature, and also use the chat for any comments, reactions. We'd love to see all that. So the what and why of digital organizing. So I want to acknowledge that, like I said earlier, there's a lot of folks on here that are organizers and have been organizing around this issue for a long time. Definitely want to acknowledge that. And just to say that digital organizing is kind of a layer onto that. It's another way to get people into your programs. It's another way to create leads. So digital organizing, lifting up our community voices. So again, digital organizing is a tool to bring people in, especially historically underrepresented groups. We do want to acknowledge that there is a real digital divide, and that's especially true for working class folks and BIPOC people. And so we definitely want to acknowledge that. But we also know that over 90% of households in the US have access to the internet. And so it's another place where we can meet people. We can also use digital organizing as a way to push back on some of those narratives that we hear a lot, especially from the NIMBY community. Sometimes a small group of people can get especially loud, but with digital organizing, we can use it as a tool to push back on those messages. And similarly, we will have access and we have ownership over these tools so that we can build our own narrative. So not just pushing back, but also being the first out there with the types of messages that we have. And so with the work that Will has done with some of the messaging around housing elements, we can use those, bring those all together and use digital organizing to deliver that. So what is digital organizing? Digital organizing is a way to bring people together online. Sometimes the goal is to move people to do actions online, but sometimes it's also to connect with people online and have them do actions offline. So whether that be having them sign some type of petition, sharing their story, or showing up at an event. Or you could also use it to share information about the campaign. So digital organizing is great to share any upcoming events, any information that's going to be really important for the folks that are really interested in the housing elements. So what makes digital organizing work? So we're organizing. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. I'm sorry. So if you're asking folks for their time and their attention, you want to have something that they could use and value in exchange. So a lot of times it can be a feeling of community or belonging. Sometimes it could even be entertainment. We've seen a lot of memes go out around certain issues to motivate people and move them to act. And a lot of times it could be just meaningful work that they can do. Folks really want to feel involved. They want to feel like what they're, the little grain of sand that they're doing to push something is going to be meaningful in a way. For the work that we're doing, a big part of that can be the feeling of community and belonging. So naturally, housing affordability and how we're doing things in the community is going to be really important for the people in the community. So building that community through digital organizing can be really, really useful. So telling effective stories through to build power. So we're going to do a short pop quiz. On the next slide, we're going to have some numbers and some issues together. So if you want to take a second, take a look, and in the chat, please pop in what you think the answers will be. And we'll take just a second for that. All right, we have one answer in there. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Matthew. an unfortunate number there, for sure. Another number we need to change. Thank you, Lena. All right, is everybody ready for the answers? Okay, so yes, unfortunately, 6 million COVID deaths, 108 US abortion restrictions in 2021, 7.9 billion is the world population, and then 27% is the percentage of women in Congress. So to go along with this theme, let's talk a little bit more now, tying names of individuals to these issues. Give folks a second to think through this. Thank you, Lauren. Absolutely, girls' education. All right, so yes, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, Emma Gonzalez, March for Our Lives, Malala, girls' education, Matthew Shepard, hate crimes, and Christine Blasey Ford, sexual assault. So as we've seen, just names or even numbers can be tied to these wider narratives because we all know the stories behind them, right? They're powerful stories. So with that, I want to pass it over to Will to talk a little bit more about stories and storytelling.
Thanks, Michael. I think the storytellers connecting to these issues, I think, is such an important point. It's a lot of what we're trying to do throughout this process of Housing Element is to actually put forth some storytellers. And we want to talk a little bit about how that works. There's a lot more about what makes for effective storytelling in the messaging guide that's been put out there, which we've covered in previous trainings. I know many of you were in at least one of those trainings before, and there are recordings and a printable version of the guide. So I'm not going to rehash all of that in detail today, but there are a few points upon storytelling that are worth thinking about in the context of digital organizing, especially since our priority right now is encouraging public feedback. So we want to talk about how that works. Stories are shortcuts for us. They help us tap into emotions, and people are more likely to move to act if we give them something to feel, if we connect with them on an emotional, personal level. So we use storytelling to motivate supporters. The stories that we are telling are going to connect with their values and experiences. That's part of the organizing work that actually recruits people, mobilizes them, gets them to come out. But we're also urging residents to share their own stories. And we're doing that because it's important to shift public perceptions, to influence decision makers. So the guidance that we're talking about today in terms of storytelling, some of it applies to the efforts that we are putting forth in terms of how we are reaching audiences in the messaging that you're putting out there through your social media channels, through your email programs, all of those different channels. But it also really applies to the storytelling that we are asking residents to do and to carry forth themselves. And so the more we can ground all of that in sort of the same sort of principles, we can get our own storytelling to be stronger, as well as supporting residents who are telling their stories. So we've mentioned this before. I think a really core touch point is that everybody, the residents that we're talking about and to, are already experts in their own experiences and their own stories. And those powerful stories stay with people. So there are a few things that make for a compelling story: when it's personal, when it's relevant, when it tells you something new and surprising. But I think for me, the most important piece of it really is what's on the right there, the authenticity. Whether it's a story that you are telling to reach supporters or it's a resident describing their own experience, people can tell when somebody is speaking from the heart. They can tell when somebody is full of it and when somebody is putting them on. And connecting in an authentic way is what matters most. It's really what's going to get people to believe that they're in the right place and that their voice matters. So again, there's a whole guide that you should read. If you haven't already had a chance to memorize it, I encourage you to do so. But a few tips to help support what's in that guide already. So first, really good stories are personal. They share your proximity to the issue. So this can be something like what has already happened to me in my experience, what is happening in our neighborhoods, what is happening in our communities, making it feel local and specific and real. It is also, oh, thanks, Alina, for sharing that link in the chat. You can talk about what it would mean to you or your family if you succeeded, if the housing policy is implemented, if we get better housing policy, what is that going to mean for my family, for my coworkers, for my neighbors? Talking about that personal connection, especially since all of the messaging right now that you're putting out there for the housing elements are going to be really about sort of lived experiences, local communities, neighborhoods that people care about and live in every single day. Effective storytelling, we can go to the next one, Michael. Also connects to the audiences. So this is about experiencing trying to draw that connection between my experience is like this, that's very personal. This is what I see, what I experience, what I care about. I'm going to connect that to your experience as well, because I know that together we have some commonalities. So the message we're putting out there is going to show that that connection and to remind people that our community advances together. It rises up together. When we are a single voice, calling for change, that can be very isolating. When you know that somebody else shares your same experience or similar experiences, and that we're in this together, there's a sense of movement building there. There's a sense of community that is, I think, important in any sort of organizing context. I mean, it's a sort of a very basic organizing principle that we want to draw those connections. But I think it's especially powerful when we're talking about issues like housing, which really are, again, like so specific to a time and a place, to a community and a neighborhood. There's a shared understanding, a shared experience that we really want to tap into. Data is really great in context, in setting context. It's good for describing the scale of a problem. For some folks who sort of do advocacy in a particular issue area day after day, it's really easy to get caught up in those numbers because you track them really closely, you know what it means, you automatically sort of extrapolate to sort of the impact on the community. But we want to be selective in the data that we're using and how we're building it into stories, because for most people, numbers are really hard to contextualize. They don't tend to motivate people. Just even a statistic that feels shocking to somebody on the face of it doesn't tend to really move people. We need to connect it to a lived experience. So a good approach, and what I'd encourage you to do in your own storytelling, or as you're supporting residents in weighing in on the housing policies in your community, is to pair that data with more personal storytelling. So if X% of the people in your community are at risk of experiencing homelessness in a given year, that X% might be a really shocking number where you are. But that alone is not likely to move people. So it's helpful to say that's what the number is. That's the fact, and this is the scale of what we're confronting. But if you really want to connect with folks, you should also describe what it means for an individual family, or describe a lived experience of somebody who has been in that position, so that that number becomes more than just a statistic. It becomes representative of lived experiences that people can connect to in a really human way. And then this is something that I really did hammer home a lot in the messaging guide, and I don't have like a new thing to say about it. I'm just going to keep on telling you because it's so important and so central to this. Effective storytelling is clear, it's concise, and it has, especially from an organizing perspective, a really clear call to action. So if you are going to be saying a lot of things, if you have a Facebook post, if you have an email going out, whatever is the messaging that you are putting out there, the most clear, obvious thing that somebody should walk away from it with is knowing what they can do. That call to action, and this is going to be different. We've been looking at different cities to try to sort of like frame this for you and support the efforts. I know that in some cities, the way to weigh in on the housing policy draft is through showing up at a live event. In other places, it's going to be just sending an email to the person is what some folks have set, what some cities have set up. In other places, there's a web form or there's a survey, whatever that happens to be, and there may be multiple options where you are. You pick the one that you think is either most accessible, and Michael's going to talk a little bit about the ladder of engagement in a second, or just most important in actually moving the policy that you want to move, and make it really clear that that's the main thing to do. You want to motivate people by connecting them with what is the emotional state that's going to get them there. That might be feeling outraged and frustrated with the way things are right now. That might be an optimistic and hopeful vision of the future that we want to work toward. It might be a sense of community power building, and that can be really motivating to people, but that emotional core needs to be there. And then the last, not that it's not important, but it's sort of secondary to those concerns, is what are the facts that you need somebody to know? So these are facts like where to show up and how to weigh in, and what kind of feedback is helpful at this point in the process. There may be details about the current draft that you want people to really focus in on. So one or two things that are either missed opportunities or things that you're unhappy with in the current policy. whatever it is, there are going to be some facts that sort of underpin it, but those facts alone are not going to likely motivate people. You can want to really tap into that personal connection, that storytelling, and again, build that back always, always, always to the call to action. That's a lot to keep track of. So we wanted to share an example of what we're talking about using storytelling to recruit. So Michael, you want to play this video?
It's so important to make sure that the people making this housing plan hear from the residents like you and me, and it's easy to make your voice heard. All you do is go to the next public meeting and sign up for public comment. You tell them your name, where you live, and what you want to see in the housing plan, just like this.
Hi, my name is Jeff. I grew up in the East Bay and I've lived here for nearly 60 years. We have a once-in-a-decade opportunity to have our communities come together and make a plan to address our housing issues and ensure housing security and stability for everyone, our elders, our children, our essential workers.
Stay involved. You can find local folks working for better housing options at the link above. We're coming together to make sure this next housing plan works for us. Join in.
So first, shout out to Janae and to Jeff for being superstars in this video. This is going to be, along with a lot of other assets, available to you all to use in your own promotions. It'll be graphics and social media posts. Alina is going to be sharing a link to where all those things will be hosted, and we'll be continuing to add to those assets as well. But just a couple of things to point out about that video that I think are important and what we're trying to do here. First, you can see it right on the slide. This is the big issue, right? Housing is the #1 issue facing families. That's very general. And we connect that big general issue to the personal. We talk about how it affects families and neighbors and communities, actual human lived experience. And then Janae comes in to give a first person call to action really effectively. And so that's sort of like, this is the digital organizing. She's out there saying, this is what we need. Here's why it matters. I care about this too. We are in this together, that kind of relationship building. And then transitions over to Jeff, who demonstrates what a resident story can look like, how a resident can speak out. And so this is a little bit broad, but he talks about his own experience growing up in the Bay Area. He talks about a community he cares about, the people whose lives will be affected. And that is the kind of storytelling that is going to connect with audiences, whether they are decision makers or the broader public who is engaged in these issues. So that storytelling approach is in the call to action, and it's in that sample statement as well. So yeah, that's how it's going to be. We have other graphics and other assets as well, but that's what we want to do. Is it can feel a little bit abstract, be personal, and also talk about data, and also talk about the issues. When you boil it all together, it sounds like people talking about things they care about, and that's really sort of at the heart of what we are doing here. So we're just going to keep on watching this for the next half hour on repeat now. Go ahead, Michael.
Cool. Thanks, Will. That's a great video there. And yeah, thank you for leading us into the next thing we're going to talk about is meeting supporters where they are and the ladder of engagement. So this is going to, for the folks that are organizers and do organizations that do organizing, this is going to be, pretty relevant and pretty similar to how those things are, but on a digital scale. So meeting folks where they are and ladder of engagement. So of course, the ladder of engagement is bringing people in with a small with a small ask, or an ask that they're comfortable with. Not everybody is going to be comfortable doing the same type of ask. Some people want to start out slow. Some people, if you ask them to come to a meeting or give a public comment on the first try, they might do that. There's some very outgoing, extroverted people that would love to do that. But at the similar rate, there's folks that maybe need a little bit more preparation they need some of that community building. They need to feel a little bit more comfortable before they're able to take some of those big steps. So here's just a sample progression of what a digital organizing ladder of engagement could look like. So the good thing about digital organizing is that there's a ton of different small asks that you can have people take to bring them in. So whether that's sharing a post on social media, whether that's having them invite 3 friends via a DM on Facebook or Instagram to an event, whether that's sharing just information on any one of their social media platforms, that could be a first step. And then the next step, as you talk to them a little bit more, you bump them up to a higher ask, which would be like attending a public meeting, just seeing how it is, getting a feel for it, feeling comfortable. And then once you get them feeling comfortable, then maybe they can then share their story as public comment, or get other people to share their stories as public comment. That's the one great thing about digital organizing, and we'll talk about some digital tools a little bit later. There's some great digital tools where you can do relational organizing, that you can keep track of these conversations, so that friends are talking to other friends, neighbors are talking to other neighbors through peer-to-peer or SMS, all these different digital tools. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But as far as the ladder of engagement, usually want to start out a little bit with the lower bar ask, and then moving them up. And then everybody's different. Like I said earlier, everybody's a little bit different. They're going to come in at different spots of the ladder of engagement, whether it's doing a really high bar ask first or coming in a little bit lower. The main key thing is to give people options. So like I said, with digital organizing, there's all kinds of ways to get involved. If you add in these other digital tools, whether it's social media platforms or messaging services, or even sending out emails, things of that nature, there's different ways to get involved. There's many options. So you want to keep options open for people so that they can come in at the right spot that's comfortable for them. You can build that trust with them, and then they'll do digital organizing, and then they can also do physical organizing. So now we're going to dive in a little bit to digital tools. So here's a digital organizing channel overview. We're going to go in depth into these a little bit more one by one, but want to share these. These are some of the more common ones. There's all kinds of other different digital tools out there that kind of are related to some of these, but these are, I would say, the most common ones used. And a lot of these are actually also very much tied to physical organizing. A lot of times, like I said earlier, it's online organizing to offline organizing. So yeah, let's dive in a little bit deeper into each one. So the first one we want to talk about is a website or a petition page. So website and petition pages are great for a lot of static information. So information that's not going to change a lot, whether that's dates, guidelines, informations, and any messaging recommendations. All those things are good for a website because you probably won't have to update them that often. Websites or petitions, they take a little bit more expertise. They take a little bit more, if you're building a website, of course, you need technical help. Petitions, they take a little bit longer to build with some of these programs. But the benefits of specifically a petition page is that you can collect emails and phone numbers. So if you're planning to build out some type of list to contact people that really care about this process, you can use petition pages to collect their contact information. And you can then use that information to either in coordination with these other digital tools or just with one-on-one outreach. And it's a great tool to have. And here's an example of a petition page in particular. So you'll see here at the top that the first part that we have here is core messaging. So the great thing about what we're doing here is that we have that messaging already. We've worked on that. We're going to be sharing that. So you can literally pull messaging from those recommendations and put them into some type of petition page and use that pretty easily. And then there towards the middle, you want to have a clear call to action. So you want to want to give somebody give them the option to do, exactly what you're asking them to do. So being pretty direct, of course, having a direct ask is always great. So here, asking somebody to sign the petition, they know clearly why they're signing the petition. We're telling our leaders that we support these policies, and then and then towards the bottom there, you're going to collect the information. The important thing to note here is that you only want to really collect the information that you feel is necessary. The less information that you make required, the more likely somebody is to fill it out. It's less barriers. It's a quicker thing for them to do. So if you really only need their first, last name, and their address just to confirm that they're in your community, in your neighborhood, then you can do that. But if you also want their phone number and their email to eventually contact them, you definitely want to make those things required. And there's other things that you can require as well, but generally you want to keep it as concise as possible to get as many people to sign your petition as possible. So the next one we're going to talk about is email. So email is great to talk directly to your supporters. It's a great way to share information. It's a great way to invite them to certain things. So if there's an upcoming meeting or a rally or something like that, you can use email to get them involved. You can also ask them to share things and amplify things on social media. So if you're trying to sway a public leader, you can use email actually to ask people to amplify a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram post. So those are great ways to communicate with your folks. There is a little bit of a difference too between mass email programs, so like a MailChimp or Every Action that folks might use. You can also do personal one-to-one emails. So when you're working with people, working with residents that have come in on some of those lower bar asks, a personal one-on-one email can be great to send out to ask for some of those higher bar asks. So if you're asking them to share their story, a one-on-one email is going to be better for that than sending a mass email to your whole list asking for stories. You'll probably still collect some stories if you do the mass email, but that personalized one-on-one email is probably better for those higher bar asks. So SMS. So SMS is a broadcast text messaging. So broadcast text messaging, basically what that means is that in some of these platforms, you can write in a message that all of the people on the list of phone numbers that you've collected get the same message, and you can send it out with one click of the button. This is a little bit different from peer-to-peer. There's also peer-to-peer programs where you send out the same message, but you have volunteers sending that message one at a time. Both of them are great. Both of them have different uses. SMSs, these broadcast messages, are really good for rapid response. So if there's an event happening and somebody said something that's related to the housing elements program, and you want to get a quick reaction from folks, and you want to get some pushback on it, sending out an SMS to your list, asking them to do something is a really quick and easy way to get that type of engagement. The good thing about SMS as well is that most people have cell phones, And most people actually read their text messages. It's a lot easier to ignore an email. You have the subject line. If you get an SMS, I don't know why it is. Maybe folks are a little bit more curious to see what comes into their messaging inbox, but they're more likely to actually read it. The big thing here, though, is that with regulations that are out there, folks there are regulations that you have to have people that have opted into your list. So have proactively said that they are signing off on you sending them text messages. And that's something that you can collect with your petition pages. It's something that you can collect on your website. It's one other step to do to run one of these programs. But again, these are really effective for some of these rapid response, getting information out quickly. And then here's an example. So we have an SMS here, the first message about a housing plan. This is someone that signed a petition. We already know that they're interested in housing as an issue. And so we're asking them, their opinion. Do they think that there needs to be more options for affordable housing? They reply yes. We're asking them to reply yes or no. Then that's great. Now we know that they're really interested. Now we can share some information with them. So these can be really conversational. There's a lot of good programs out there that can make these interactions really conversational, even though technically it is kind of like a robot or a bot that's sending these messages, but you can make it so it becomes a conversation instead of just a one-way kind of conversation. And then the next thing I want to touch on is Facebook. So Facebook is really good for some things. It's great to grow awareness and engagement through some of your storytelling. It's really great to share information as well. What really works on Facebook is eye-popping graphics or graphics or photos that really grab people's attention. Those are the things that work best on Facebook. The other really good thing about Facebook is our Facebook groups. So if you have you can create a Facebook group around your area and ask people to join that group. You can find ways to get people to engage in that group, sharing housing related articles in there. You can share events that are coming up, meetings, actions, just trying to get people involved in that group and making them feel, again, that community. So Facebook groups creating that community. Another good thing about Facebook, which I'll touch on with some of these other social media platforms that works really well, is social media canvassing. So if your organization has a Facebook page and you post something that gets pretty good engagement, either comments or likes, one thing that you can do is actually go and directly message the people that left you good comments and left you likes, asking them about them in the community, them how they feel about housing affordability, informing them about the Housing Elements program, mainly as a way to get them into the door. So again, another low bar way to get people in, get new people in. Facebook and social media in general, canvassing is a great way to do that. And here's an example of a Facebook post. And I think the great thing to see here is just the amount of different languages. We of course want to make it as inclusive as possible. But a sample Facebook post, we took some of the graphics that will be shared with some of the core messaging. and then great, you have a really nice Facebook image that is going to get engagement, it's going to get people likes, it's going to get some comments, and it's going to get people interested in the housing elements. And then the next thing is Instagram. So Instagram is great for, again, photos and videos. Videos actually play really well on Facebook, on Instagram, and get great engagement. So using the Reels feature, creating videos, taking videos of residents, telling their stories works really well on Instagram, sharing real life stories. Also using the Instagram live feature. So if you're going to be at an event, at a public hearing, Instagram live at that hearing is something that you can do with Instagram. It works really well on there. It creates engagement and shares information. And here's an example of something else that you could do on Instagram. Using the Instagram stories feature, there's actually a polls feature that you can put on there. So you can create a question for folks, ask them how they feel about something. So here we're asking if renters should have more rights. Of course they should. People, what you would do here to follow up is all the folks that said yes to this question, you could send a direct message to them, get to know them, talk to them, and then bring them into your program. It's another low lift way to get more people involved. Twitter. So Twitter is really good for also rapid response, sharing information. It's specifically really good for applying pressure on policymakers. Most every politician has a Twitter account. And so if there's a public leader that maybe you want to see something, hear a story, you can amplify that story by having other people share that video, share that story on Twitter, and tagging that policymaker, that leader. Another way that you can use Twitter, there's a lot of influencers on Twitter that already have large followings. You can collaborate with them and work with them on some of the messaging and send out so that they inform the public, they inform the people that are in their community, in their neighborhoods. Influencer work is becoming a lot more prevalent now with digital organizing. With they just have so many followers, organic followers, and not only that, the people that follow them really relate to their content, so they're really good they're really good trusted messengers of those messages. And here's just a example Twitter post. You can take the messaging from the core messaging that we're sharing, put it into a tweet. You can share information about an upcoming meeting, put it into a tweet. It all works really well on Twitter. And here's just a list of some different tactics that folks can use using digital organizing, or even some of these are related to physical organizing. Wanted to see if anybody in the chat wanted to share maybe if they've used any of these in the past, or have they been successful with any of these, or are any of these maybe didn't work out as well as they thought they would? Want to give a couple seconds for that. So please feel free to share.
And this is the end of our content as well. So if folks have questions they want to sort of bring up now, we've got the rest of our time here to share your experiences and to answer any questions that you might have. So drop those in the chat or in the Q&A. While folks are thinking about that, one question that anonymous attendee asked here is saying that they're seeing a trend in social media communication, posting images with text on them, including links that don't have alt text or captions, which is inaccessible to a lot of people. How do we get organizers to include alt text and captions with clickable links? We just do it. I mean, I think accessibility is a big concern. It's something that we should be treating seriously, and it is going to come up in a few different ways. So there are going to be folks who have who are using screen readers that are not going to be able to parse the links that are embedded in an image. Alt text is super important, and making things accessible in terms of the language barriers that might exist in your communities. I don't know how we get people to do a better job of it other than to tell them to, honestly. And I think as organizers, as communicators, it's on us to do a better job, to be paying attention to those needs and to those differences of ability to access information.
Yeah, and I've also seen some more so the more video heavy social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok. They're probably the best at using captions, and like TikTok is actually really easy to create captions. They can auto generate captions, or you can go in and actually create your own captions. But I agree with like alt text and all that other stuff. I wish it was more accessible. I wish folks would just create some type of app that was like all encompassing, but we know those things move slowly. But yeah, please share any other questions that you may have. We're happy to answer anything.
Yeah, Landre brings up commenting, not necessarily commenting on an official's post, but tagging officials in tweets, including your calls to action. Graphics seems to work well. Yeah, elected officials have all sorts of different relationships to their social media. So some folks are really engaged in it. They are the actual person who holds the office is the one who is on Twitter all day long. Other folks have their staff do it, or they don't really pay attention to it. So you're going to know best sort of like what your local political landscape looks like. But to the extent that you have a couple of voices, whether they're allies or on the fence or on the other side of some of these issues, if they are the ones who are really active and engaged with local journalists and with other elected officials, and they, like follow them, pay attention to what they're doing, and try to rope them into the conversations that you're having as well.
And Lauren, love your comment about the personal stories. It can feel like an uphill battle for sure. But I think the thing that digital organizing can do is create that surround sound, so that they're not only hearing those stories in person, which definitely should, and then also hearing that online. And so creating that surround sound, I think maybe won't sway everyone, but I think the pressure of it hopefully will lead to victories.
Yeah, great flag from Lauren. How important it is to keep track of the stories that you have when you've used them, what issues they touch on, and especially with a lot of these sort of community organizing efforts, maintaining contact with the folks who submit stories. So if somebody is willing to go to that link, that's somebody who's pretty invested in change. That's somebody who's pretty invested in this movement. And so developing that relationship, Michael talks a lot about ladder of engagement. Continuing to keep those people involved and making sure that they see that their engagement has an impact. We covered this a lot in the messaging training, talking about how storytelling is meaningful and impactful motivates people to want to do more. And so when we can reflect that back to folks and say, hey, we shared your story and this was the reaction, we saw people weighing in and agreeing or wanting to learn more, all of that helps people want to continue that engagement and stay with you.
Yeah, and similarly, Lauren, that's such a great point about keeping track of those stories, because with those people's consent, you can use those stories in emails. So if you have one resident and a lot of emails are coming from them, your list, the people on your list, they're going to know that person. They're going to get to know them, know their story. They're going to want to fight even more because they know that they're in it together. You can use that in emails. You can use that in SMS. Any message that you're sending out, using that effective storytelling and consistent messaging.
I want to uplift Will and Michael. There's a new question in the QA box about asking to what degree we inform and educate the target audience to communicate in a way to officials that will allow them to be receptive. So any guidance on how you're both mobilizing folks to be like, yes, I see that this is meaningful. I see that this is accessible. I see that I can do it, but then also giving them some prescriptive guidance on how to do it.
Yeah, so I think some of this is modeling, so showing them examples of these are the kind of messages that we are collecting, and here's what it looks like. And then, or if you have a couple of bullet points, we want to make sure that we are reinforcing these messages, that we are focusing on, the need for just production. Like that's the thing we're talking about. We want to make sure we're building more affordable housing in this community. You can give those sort of like, this is the right thing to do, kind of models and guidance. And then, yeah, I mean, to the extent that people are using profanity in their public comments, that's probably not going to be helpful. And I think that it's okay to say that honestly. We don't want to overwhelm people with detail. So if you have do's and don'ts, do these 3 things, don't do those 3 things. That is simple guidance that people can sort of take and run with. I think that's honestly the best we can do. We can't stop people from swearing at their public officials. That's in the First Amendment and an important part of who we are as a people, the ability to swear at your elected officials. But I do think that, yes, saying what is effective and why, giving some quick do's and don'ts, I think can be helpful and can be part of your recruiting materials.
And want to uplift Carol. Great comment there about email templates. Templates are always great to share with folks. And with some of the programs with petitions, you can actually send a direct email through the petition page to an elected official, and you create the template in that program. So email templates are great. They work great, very effective. Thank you, Carol.
Folks have any other questions? Super glad to see this was helpful for y'all. All right, I think we can wrap. Thank you so much, Michael and Will, and all of our partners and NPH staff for the support in this project. I hope you found this training useful. The recording, slide deck, and organizing materials will be shared with everyone shortly, along with our feedback form. So tell us what we nailed, tell us what we're missing by filling out the form. That kind of information is crucial to ensuring we create content that really works for us. You can join us over at shiftthebay.org as well to continue exploring our narrative initiatives research, including the playbook, message guide, and other additional resources and events. And you can also join our awesome Shift the Bay Slack community and sign up for monthly updates on shiftthebay.org as well. Thanks, y'all. See you soon.